Welcome everybody to today's Fightback session. I'm Lily, I'm the coordinator of this virtual event series. Let me start off by telling you a couple of words about who we are and the mission that we are on here where everybody's dropping in. FoundersLane is a founders-driven corporate venture building in health and climate. And in essence, we approach today's challenges with an entrepreneurial mind, results-driven action to create a better future. And Fightback is the word that we coined in this context, because in these present times of massive business disruption, we want to contribute by hosting these trusted spaces to enable our business leaders and their companies with actionable insights and advice to not only survive, but really thrive in the digital economy that awaits us. And in today's conversation, we'll explore how to prove that it works, lessons learned from animal research in digital health. This is gonna be spicy. I'm really looking forward to this one. So you're joining today's conversation with two very remarkable humans. So we have Sven. He's a bridge builder between science and entrepreneurship, and he's leading our health circle at FoundersLane. And he traded his doctor's robe in the ER with entrepreneurial teams to co-create meaningful health solutions. Welcome, Sven. And we have Stefan. He's an experienced founder and former McKinsey consultant who has found his passion in digital health. And he co-founded Dopavision together with Hamed, an experienced neuroscientist. I'm sure he's going to tell us more about this incredible product in a bit. Welcome, Stefan. So let me hand over to Sven. The stage is yours.
Hi, thank you. Before we start, just a very few words on FoundersLane. We do corporate venture building, so we go together with the big corporates. I'm in charge of healthcare, so I mostly do that in health, but we also have a strong arm in the climate space. And we do that because we think that in many areas where it's very science-based, where you have a lot of regulatory entry barriers, and often the stuff you build depends a lot on human behavior change, it's really difficult for startups to make it. Or to even jump these entry barriers. And so we think that it's smart in these cases to use the assets of established corporations to play in that field. But there are some really good examples where it also works without a corporation. And one of it is now represented by Stefan. So extremely excited to hear some of his reflections. I know some of you who are in this channel, and I know that we often have conversations around this. So I think it will be quite insightful. But before we go to the actual topic, Stefan, maybe you could share a little bit of information about what Dopavision is about, where the name comes from, who you guys are, what you've been doing, and maybe some insights on what's coming up next, so that we have the context.
Thank you very much, Sven, and yeah, happy to be here. Welcome everybody. So let me just tell you briefly about what we do at Dopavision. So we're developing a digital treatment for myopia or short-sightedness. Dopavision was founded in end of 2017 by Hamed, who's an experienced neuroscientist who's done a lot of research into brain research, a lot of experience in there, and it was basically founded out of Flying Health, which is an ecosystem in Berlin on digital health ventures. With the goal to develop a digital treatment for myopia. Myopia short-sightedness is a very common condition, just as a reminder. So short-sightedness is when you see objects in the distance blurry, but very clearly on the near side. It has grown to incredible proportions in recent years, especially in Southeast Asia. You have prevalences of 70 to 80% in urban areas among young people. So that's really 70 and 80%. And so literally soon everybody will be myopic there. And the medical problem that is of course known, and not only to us, is that high myopia dramatically increases the risk for other visual comorbidities. Retinal detachment for one, macular degeneration, also cataract and glaucoma that can severely inhibit your vision or even lead to vision loss. And even things like retinal detachment, which is if caught early, is preventable totally in Germany. I know of a case in Germany of a 30-something lady who postponed going to the doctor, basically, who was also highly myopic. And she unfortunately lost part of her vision on that part of the retina that was detached. So it is a very serious condition. And the only way to basically change that risk profile is to slow down and stop the progression of myopia in children. And there are several ways to do that, pharmaceutical or optical, but none of them really satisfactory, and all of them not patient-friendly. So either you have to wear special contact lenses during the day that inhibit your vision, or you have to wear ortho K, so really non-flexible contact lenses overnight. So none of them are actually patient-friendly and established treatments. And we have set our goals to develop a digital treatment that works by light stimulation of specific retinal nerve cells to increase the level of dopamine on the retina, which you can show in animal experiments quite well, that this acts as an inhibitor for myopia. And this is, as I said, an incredibly large problem. So we're really tackling something that can touch the lives of hundreds of millions of people all over the world, especially in Asia. And we believe that a digital way to solve this is something that a lot of patients would welcome, and a lot of kids would actually love doing.
Well, thank you for this. Now, a lot of people who spend time in the healthcare space, they're used to getting a lot of pitches around stuff that helps hundreds of millions of people, and often all they hear, if they scratch beneath the surface, is just an intuitively charming proposition, right? Where it kind of makes sense, but it often sounds like snake oil 4.0. And so I think, well, that's the topic of our session today. Can you maybe, before we go into in depth, like share a little bit about something about the roadmap you took, the journey you went on to prove that what you do actually works?
Yes, and of course that's the title of the session, and also that's my strong belief that in order to distinguish sort of, maybe some lifestyle apps or other apps that help you live a healthier lifestyle from real serious digital health is in the evidence that you generate, because that's what I believe in, and that's, I think, the established process in how do you prove that medicine in general works. You prove it by generating the data. Only the treatments that can prove that they clinically improve relevant endpoints, they actually get to be used further. But undertaking a clinical study is, of course, something very complicated. So I think as a startup, and that's also the way we did it, is you have to basically start small and then build on top of it step by step, because I think all of these evidence undertakings are typically complex and also costly, and therefore, and for a good reason, because you can't arbitrarily intervene into any medical processes. So there you have to take things step by step. And the way we did it was that in as early as 2018, we completed proof of concept experiments in humans together with an academic partner, actually the University of Tübingen, to show that indirectly we can stimulate with our technology, we can stimulate dopamine in humans. So that was basically the first piece of evidence that we were able to then raise a seed round on top of that, with based on these results, together with Boehringer Ingelheim, a large German pharma company, and that is basically that was basically the first step. That really there is definitely something there. It's not only a theoretical argument, but also you have the experimental results to show it. As a second step, or two main steps that we have worked on since then, is that we are adding more and more human experiments and human data to the existing proof of concept, by also together with academic partners in Europe, in Portugal, in fact, by using ERG technology, that's electroretinograms, also as a measurement for dopamine, in order to strengthen our evidence base and also establish dosage response relationships, basically to help us identify what is the correct or the optimal dose of our treatment in a variety of parameters for later application. And the second main thing that we're targeting, that we're currently in the process of completing, is animal experiments. And we're using an animal model where we're showing the effect of our treatment directly on the relevant endpoint, which is the axal length or the myopia development of the animals. And to my knowledge, we're actually the first startup in the world to do so. So clinical studies, a lot of digital startups or digital health products are using clinical trials. But so far, I haven't heard of any that uses an animal model really to show that their approach works. And I believe so we're in the world's first one to do so. And again, together with academic partners, because of these are not experiments you can basically do yourselves, and probably you should not do them yourselves either. We are in 2 locations working on generating data in an animal model that will show the effectiveness or the impact on myopia of our treatment.
Beautiful. I haven't heard of any either, so I actually think it's true. Can you share some lessons learned from this? Were there any surprises that you ran into? Is there something that you wish you knew before you started going down that path?
As always, there's a million of these kind of things as you embark on a new path. I think for me, coming from a consulting background and also having founded another company before that was in the e-commerce space, I think one is in general that you should not and cannot underestimate the complexity of these type of research, because this is in general typically quite complex research, and that sort of you have to, there are some differences than executing, for example, a business project together with a business partner on that, because there will always be differences along the way, and there are basically you have to allow the time and the iterations to happen in order to achieve the results. The second is that you really have to find the right partner to do so, because in the end, the quality of your results and also the how well it is basically how it is perceived in the scientific community will of course depend on how good the work is that you've actually done, and that hugely depends on the partner that you do it with. So you want to engage people who are renowned in the field. You want to engage people who've done these kind of experiments before, because in many cases the setup of the experiment itself is not trivial. So you want to be with someone who has like done this before, and in some cases, as it was with our animal research, there are actually very few people in the world who can do this, because it is not at all trivial to first of all measure and basically set up a clean and good experimental protocol to measure myopia in animals. So in order to basically find the right partners to do that, that is definitely something that you need to allow enough time and also put enough effort in, of course, because the quality of your end product and how successful you're going to be hugely depends on the partners that you choose.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a third learning that I want to add here, as I said, there's I think a necessity to deal with academic partners, or to have academic partners on board. As in the development of new treatment, this is almost always the case. And what I actually encountered, or what we encountered, is there's a huge variety of how the academic institutions, or how easily you can negotiate with the academic institutions, because when you do the projects together with Professor X, of course you want to have a contract, and typically you have a contract with the university. And there, at least there was our experience, there's quite a variety in, first of all, sort of how quickly you can iterate a contract with the university, and secondly, how open they are for negotiations on certain elements that are crucial in these research contracts. I mean, of course, you have also the pricing dimension, that's always the case, but also the who owns in the end intellectual property rights and the data rights and publication rights to that, to the kind of works that you do. And if you come from a business perspective, you kind of have the internal logic that if you pay for it, then you kind of own all the results as well. But that is not necessarily the thinking in some universities. And if they are really good enough, then they will demand more things on top of that. And that can lead to sometimes very lengthy negotiations.
A big concern that I often hear is around times to market. So you have already invested a lot in building that tech. Then you have this uncertainty in terms of getting the evidence. You might be able to draw comparisons from, I don't know, drug development or other medtech areas, but might also be quite different. In parts also because of sort of these negotiation issues that you mentioned. Maybe, and that would also be another question for a moment, because people are not used to these sorts of things. And then you don't really know what's coming up in the end, right? How much money can you get out of it? That's going to be another conversation to have. Even now with the Digital Care Act that's out in Germany. Did you consider any alternative courses, if you can share some around that? Or was it always clear that you were going to go down this scientific path? Are there any side things that you tried?
So I think this is a very good question, and a question that we've also discussed internally, and we keep discussing internally for every now and then. And our technology is based on a virtual reality smartphone, let's say, application or a game that we want to engage in the end the user with, while he or she receives the stimulus. So in the end, it is not something of like a laser technology, or where we apply energy or forces to the eye, which are not there otherwise. So of course, for us, it was a discussion at some point whether is this something, you know, where you need all this evidence and where you need kind of the approval parts, the regulated parts, or can you just put it out as a game on the market, and then have people, you know, play it, and then it helps them with myopia. So if you ask me, I think the only commercially viable option in the long term is if you really go the serious medical route, because the key argument to market it and why people are wanting to pay for it is that it has a therapeutic effect. And as soon as you write this on top of things, then I mean, first of all, you're legally obligated to then have a certification, because in many countries, and Germany is one of them, you can hardly claim something as a therapeutic effect and then market it because it's not allowed. Plus, I also think then if you can't argue precisely why it is better, and for that you need the data for it, then I think in the long term, also economically, you will not be successful. You will end up as being another app that might be in fashion for a while, but then disappear. And I think the eventual goal also for us and for digital medicine should always be a reimbursement. So I'm not saying that you cannot be also successful outside of the reimbursement, but on the other hand, if you think you have a treatment that makes sense to have, that has a proven clinical effect, and that as digital, of course, can be priced at basically whatever price point and can be made accessible to all. Sort of, why should the national insurance I mean, be it Germany or any other country, why should they not pay for it if it's within their covering of services? Because if it's a pill that has the same effect, then I think it's no question that insurances would pay for it. So if you are in the same, if you hold the standards to digital health similar to that to other treatments, then I think there's no reason why this should not be the case. And I think eventually then this helps you to be to realize much higher price points that you could otherwise. Now this is a very long time, and if you try to do this from the beginning onwards, I think you need a very long breath to realize that. So of course there's other ways around that, and also to engage users in the beginning. But I think eventually if you're sort of a B2C treatment, then if you manage to get reimbursed, this helps your economic business case definitely.
Thanks, very good. I'm going to hold back on my next question because there are two questions that just came in, and I think they're both great. So Uwe Geisler asks, are you also looking into the impact of your technology to treat certain depressions?
It's a very good question, because we know, and I'm sure that's the background of the question also, that dopamine is, of course, not only relevant to myopia, but a very important neurotransmitter that is linked to many different processes in the body, including mental health and including potential things for depression. So I would say we're looking into this, but for now we are focusing on developing a treatment for myopia, because it's a huge market, and I'm a huge believer in the basic startup logic that you have to focus on one thing great in the beginning and develop a great product for this. And if you try to do multiple things, then you fail at either of them. So we are definitely thinking on expanding our treatment beyond myopia, because if you think about it, then we're building a way to regulate levels of dopamine in the retina non-invasively, completely non-invasively, with purely with light and with an engaging product. So that, of course, can have many different applications. But for the current moment, we focus on building a great digital product that works on myopia in order not to lose sight of that one target.
Yeah, I mean, the mantra,
very good question.
Isn't it? Yeah. I think the mantra of nail it before you scale it is true everywhere. I think it's particularly true in healthcare because the overhead and the additional scientific risks and everything that you have quickly become unmanageable. So I think it's really smart to stay in the niche and all of the operational risks that you have as well, right? You mentioned sort of negotiation issues and then problems finding the right partners to make all of this happen and so on. If you do this in parallel with various streams, that also means you have to probably discuss it with different departments, different clinics, and so on and so on. And I just think it can be extremely hard. And it's much easier if you can say, hey, we're the guys who nailed this for disease X. Now we're attacking disease Y. Getting investors on board, getting researchers on board, and so on and so on, I think is much easier than if you try to do it in parallel.
I fully agree. And maybe one thing to add on this, I think what maybe many digital health products underestimate, that I think you have to not only build something that's clinically viable, but you have to build a great digital product as well, because that's the only way it's actually going to be used. And only if it's going to be used, then you're going to be successful, because if you end up with something clinically that has the best clinical results, but it's a shitty product, then nobody uses it because you need to use it every day for a couple of minutes. And I think there's a very proven basic assumption on how you can do this, and you have to do this together with the users or based on user feedback. I mean, that's what the digital industry has been doing for the last 20, 30 years. And I think this is almost impossible to do if you don't zoom in one specific use case in one specific user group. And in our case, this is indeed myopic children at a specific age range. And I think that's what you have to really target your efforts to build the product for, and for you know, on a second line on depression, it might be biologically sort of similar or similar experiments that you want to do with a different target, but you might have to develop a completely different product because you might engage adults, you might engage them in a completely different circumstance for maybe a different duration in the day. I think that makes it very hard, and especially for digital product development, that you don't focus on one. I think it's near to impossible to develop a really successful one.
Yeah, smart. That's another issue, and I'm digressing a little bit, but I think it's still important. I often get pitches where people say, we're going to start with rare disease X, and then from there we can just gradually expand. And there are two naiveties behind that. One is that within the same disease, you already have a lot of different types of customers. So only because you have had a heart attack doesn't make you similar to the other people with heart attacks. And you still have your psychographics, your demographics, and so on that you need to be mindful of. And they also affect health. So even for the clinical outcomes, I think it plays a role. And then just like you say, right, there are so many other things. Somebody who has depression probably is older, probably has different motivations, needs different type of design, different colors, and so on and so on, to suit the whole problem and not just the isolated problem of the sort of dopamine excretion or something. Yeah, really, really cool. And then Johan, you also had a good question. Johan is from Singapore, calling in from Singapore. You mentioned about having the right price point. How can this be defined for digital therapeutics?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And yeah, the pricing, I mean, pricing is always hard. I mean, with any product, and especially with digital products. So we of course haven't defined a price point yet for a product that is not existing. But my take on this is that I see the advantage of our treatment as being something that is very, very simple to start, and also very engaging, and doesn't require a lot of upfront neither effort nor investment. As this is the case if you use, you know, some types of contact lenses or R2K for myopia, you have to go to the optometrist, get it fitted. It's a lengthy process. Probably have to invest around €1,000 for your first pair, which can last a year. Whereas something, you have a digital product like ours, is you basically, you get diagnosed, you want to use it, and then you download it directly, and then the next day you can start using it. And I think that is the great advantage. And I think in line with that, I don't foresee a huge upfront price point for our treatment, but rather want to build an economic case on the long-term usage of that you say, okay, you need to use all of these myopia treatments for months or even years, because in the end you are trying to impact the progression, and you can only do this through continued usage. So, you know, have something that is relatively low, but then you continue to use it for 12 months or maybe 24 months. And that's then, of course, you have suddenly, you don't sell a treatment or a pill, but you're suddenly in the much more attractive economic model of having a subscription-based business with a digital product. So where you have no additional, cost for any additional customer. And that is, I think, as we've seen in many other examples from the US and the digital industry, that is a great economic place to be. And then you have all kinds of variety around this. You can have, of course, free trials. You can have a free 12 months period to try. You can have all kinds of things. And I mean, people spend €10 a month easily on Netflix, and €50 on the Bundesliga each month. So I think there is definitely room for pricing for something that protects your eyesight.
Especially if it helps you watch the Bundesliga.
Yes.
Yeah. Another question that I had, and by the way, everybody feel free to chip in with your burning questions, is I had a few times I had some bad experiences with regulators or ethics committees where I just realized they don't really understand what's going on. one major medical institution once said that they would advise that you can only use data collected from devices if it is anonymized at the point of entry, and if you would want to use it, you would have to get permission, explicit consent from the data subjects, where you feel like, okay, but how should that be possible if it's anonymized, right? I was once at an ethics committee where we were trying to get an app, we wanted to do a trial for an app, and all it did was, after a doctor talked to a patient who was just diagnosed with cancer, that this doctor could sort of like an online library kind of, tell the app which information to give to the patient so that they can get themselves educated. Because typically when you have the first diagnosis, you're really stressed out and you remember almost nothing. Then you go on Google and then everything gets worse. And I was grilled by these people. It was like Dragon's Den in white, because they were saying you're so unethical, you want to make all of the doctors redundant and so on. And I said, but look at the thing. It says after the doctor spoke to the patient, she enters the data, and then it helps the patients get some information so that the doctor patient, and he was like, oh yeah, you can bullshit whoever you want, but I can see through this and so on. And I thought, okay, this is really difficult, right? And one last story, I spoke to another digital health entrepreneur who was just going through the certification. And she has one problem whereby the authorities say, well, basically you are like an over-the-counter drug, but people can just download it from the shops. So how do we make sure that you avoid this drug being taken, this digital therapeutic being taken by people who shouldn't have it? Because surely there are exclusion criteria. And her response was, well, this can be webbed into the app because it can detect these things, and then you can block it for the people who don't. So you don't need that human being in the pharmacy. But getting this idea through the heads of people who only think in terms of hardware and pills is really, really difficult. So we kind of ended up saying, well, in one way or another, you have a strong first mover disadvantage if you're the first one to do this. And I was wondering if you had similar reflections, being the first mover in animal testing with an app, or the other things that you did.
So that's a good question. Unfortunately, we didn't. So so maybe my experience with ethics committees is a bit different, because it's mostly outside of Germany, the experiments that we're doing. And the ethics approvals have not been, let's say, overly complex. I mean, because they are very complex if you do animal experiments anyway. So that's, I think, generally a very high bar. And I mean, maybe counterintuitively, the ethics approval limits for animal experiments are much, much higher than for human experiments, which seems a bit counterintuitive, but it's based on the fact that you have the human can decide by themselves whether they want to take part in the experiment or not. And in the animal case, they cannot do that, of course, and that's why the ethics, let's say, barriers are a lot higher. But so far, the sort of outside of that has not been overly negative. I have one interesting anecdote to share, maybe, because we do have, of course, also some experience in Germany with ethics committees, and the main feedback points we got back after basically proposing the psychophysical experiment, the blue light stimulus, etc. I think we got 12 questions back, or clarifications, and 10 of them were on data protection. And actually, one or two of them were like minor comments on the actual experiments. So on the thing that is actually done, but the rest was around, data protection and data processing of everything around it. And that's not even the app. That is just that you record the names of the participants because you want to keep a log of who's been there. I mean, and who you made appointments with. I mean, of course, you write down the names in some sort of list that you have to take proper care of after. But in that sense, I can agree with that focus on data protection. And I think this will be a challenge for us. I for sure see that. But as I said, our key markets are in Asia. And I as an entrepreneur, you always have to be an optimist. So I'm optimistic that the maybe in Singapore and other places, they are, let's say, a bit more pragmatic when it comes to putting data protection or putting the actual patient in front.
Mm-hmm. We have an interesting comment from Peter Oberländer, who, well, thanks for that. Says, I have great respect for any founders in the digital health area, as it is the most risky area you can invest in, though there may be great rewards as well, ultimately. Yeah, absolutely. You said you start with animal testing in due course. Can you elaborate a bit more on how you conducted your own studies so far? Respectively, when do you think you will be in clinical studies, and when do you plan to have an approved, thus marketed product?
Yeah, very happy. So maybe a little clarification up front. So we are right now engaged in animal testing and are looking forward to results in the course of this year. And based on that, we are anticipating to start clinical trials, or let's say our first generation of human clinical data next year. I think the other question was more around the proof of concept experiments, what we did in the beginning. So what the science team did in the beginning, or basically the scientific founder, Hamed, together with his experience and together with a colleague, Yesh, who was also there in the beginning, they, and that maybe may sound a bit simple, but they developed a first test setup of the experiments themselves and tested it also on themselves, because that's in the end, when you try out and basically are not sure what's the exact protocol of like a newly conceived approach or treatment to be developed, you first basically test it on yourself and see whether this has any impact. And I also did this in the beginning, of course. Yeah, I was also a test subject. I mean, I shouldn't say this, but as a purely, of course, way to ensure operational operability of the let's say experimental setup. But of course, you want to have a very clear idea before you engage your academic partners. You want to have a clear idea of okay, this is kind of the setup that we're proposing. This is the protocol that we're proposing. This is what we want to do. This is the idea of the effect size that we want to, or that we think we see, because you because you want to do the statistics, etc. So the clearer your idea is on that, the faster you are progressing, because otherwise you can't iterate everything with the universities. And I just saw, Peter, your comment. I don't think we're that brave, because in the end it is not much more than looking at a smartphone screen, and we have all done this for many hours each day. So I think the risk was limited in that case.
Fair point. Nevertheless, commitment.
Yeah, of course, but in the end, it's not like we pointed a laser in our eyes or something like this. So, I think the war stories you hear from people taking chemicals, in the 1900s, that they develop themselves and see what happens. I think digitally, we are still one step removed from that.
Sure. There's one final question for me, and again, everybody, please feel free. We've all been looking very closely at how research changes as a result of COVID, right? So there was suddenly much more collaboration between scientists who previously were competitors because they wanted to advance science rather than their own career, both being legitimate, obviously, as well. Or we saw processes that have been accelerated on a regulatory side, and so on and so on. As we are now going forward, I think a lot of the reflections are, were there things that were slow before that didn't have to be, that we just lose a sense of urgency, and are there things where we should probably redefine how we go about our research, even beyond COVID. There are a lot of diseases where we should be faster, I think, including cancer. And I mean, even the not lethal problems that can haunt our lives. Do you have any observations on what you think would be sensible going forward, changes you would like to see, or things where you were particularly impressed, where you think this could be good if other countries would be doing that as well, given the experience you had or the conversations you had? Anything that
yeah, so my observations on the COVID situation that of course has had it ourselves in its firm grip since a couple of months is that fortunately we were in the lucky situation that we have distributed our experiment partners around the world. So one of them, as I mentioned earlier, is in Portugal. Another one is in Australia, in fact. And in the beginning, it was a bit of a disadvantage because, you know, if the time difference, you can't easily go there. But it then turned out to be an advantage because while Europe was suffering, and especially Southern Europe in March, suffering under the high impact of COVID, Australia could still operate, and the lab was still open and people could still conduct the experiments. And in Portugal, they had to shut everything down, and in Spain as well. So that turned out, yeah, I mean, I would have liked it without COVID, of course, it would have been much, much better. But it turned out to be like a bit of a risk diversification geographically that nobody had thought would make any sense before COVID. And I was really impressed by also then, as soon as the experiments picked up again, how willing the partners are to jump to video conferences and make that possible. And I think we had quite a routine already on that because we used to meet with them via video, maybe once per week or so anyway. But they sort of also readily expanded this and adopted this. And now, of course, we communicate mostly via video conference also with them. So this was really, I was impressed by that. The thing is, another learning for me would be that when you work together with your academic partners, is especially in the beginning, you have to be there. Like you have to be together with them in the lab, first of all, to make sure that the protocol as you intend and the product as you have conceived it is used and applied in the correct or the adequate way. And secondly, because there's always problems and things you have not thought about before that you need to put your heads together and solve directly on the ground. And thirdly, of course, you want to build a relationship that you can then base the further project on. And that is, I think, so much easier in person. Nowadays, we have to do this all via video conference, but I still think that in the absence of COVID, of course, then you actually still, especially to forge a team in the beginning, nothing really beats them really spending time on the ground and solving the same problems and tackling the same challenges. That really brings you together.
Beautiful. We have an on-the-spot timing. So I see no more questions. I don't know if you have any other comments that you would like to share, but I think this was already hugely insightful. So thank you very, very much for sharing all these experiences. Thank you for spearheading the state of research and bringing a new perspective for digital health. I think it's you're doing more than just validating an idea. You're helping us advance how we go about evidence for digital health. So also thanks for that from the community. And I guess, Lily, I'm going to pass back over to you to close this.
Yes. Hi, welcome back. Thank you so much for this insightful session. I took notes like a crazy person. I think there's really super cool insights here. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights here. And for you guys in the chat, I'm going to share with you the link here for more upcoming sessions. So please check that out if you're interested for more. Sven is our star here. He's doing really cool session also in the next month. So please make sure to come back here. As I said, the recording will be shared with you. And all that's left to say, have a wonderful rest of the day and see you in our next session.